Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor. I'm so happy that I am joined today by Paul Connolly, who is a dear friend of mine and somebody who I had the privilege of working with some years ago. Paul Connolly now, though, is the sales director for Lincoln Sentry, which is a division of the Dulux Group. Scottish by birth, you can't miss the accent. Just, beautiful in your ears. Has held senior GM and sales leadership roles across several countries, including the UK, Ireland, New Zealand and Australia. Married to wife Caroline for 32 years. He also has 2 boys and he's now settled back into Brisbane. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Ingrid. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm so grateful that you could be here. Let's start by getting to know you a little bit, Paul. As a senior leader at one of Australia's most iconic companies, Dulux, and we can hear from your divine Scottish accent that there's been a little bit of a journey to a point. Can you just walk us through your career? But as you do that, if you can highlight some of the key decisions that you made that have taken you to where you currently are now.
Well, you're right, Ingrid. It's certainly been a journey. Born in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and pretty tough upbringing to start with. Started off by filling up supermarket shelves at the age of sort of 14 or 15 to help me sort of get through university. Stayed on with that supermarket company. It was a big company in the UK called Sainsbury's. We then got offered, or I got offered, a position in England. So it meant having to move from the good side to the dark side, and got a management trainee position there. So did lots of different roles, moved around the UK a huge amount. Actually ended up in Northern Ireland, just south of Belfast, and was lucky enough. It's sort of the culmination of a supermarket career in terms of being a store manager for Forestight, which is one of the big flagship stores, and one supermarket of the year there. But I would say to anybody, in terms of, certainly from a food retail, I think it's one of the hardest but most rewarding jobs you can do. It certainly teaches you a lot, and I think when you think back, or I've sort of reflected back on my career, having done that for sort of the guts of 20 years, it certainly taught you a lot, or so it's taught me a lot. Yeah. Then moved on to a company called B&Q, so my first foray into distribution for sort of a very similar company to Bunnings, and then did that for about 4 years, and then moved to real left field on a golf course. Got a sort of tap on the shoulder, and it was for a company called Cemex, huge big building materials company. Had been involved, Mexican multinational, with the Panama Canal, and big in the US and across many parts of the world. And I did a regional directorship there. That took me through to about 2010. And then the real big decision. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and there was a advert in one of the construction papers around opportunities in New Zealand. And flicked my CV off. 6 weeks later, I'm on a plane to New Zealand with a company called Fletcher Building. So it was a very similar role to what I was doing in Ireland as a regional, so I was chief operating officer for a building materials, so concrete, blocks, aggregates. And it was the best decision we ever made. So if you think about the reasons why you do things, it's a lot of it for me has been on instinct, and if it feels right at the time, it certainly makes a huge difference. So we did that, and you brought the family over, and we all settled in incredibly well. Spent 8 years in New Zealand. Was general manager for Valspar as well in New Zealand. And then, again, fickle hand of fate, 25th wedding anniversary, we're walking Noosa Beach, and I says, I quite like it here in Australia. And, started to explore opportunities, and got lucky enough to be picked up by Bunnings as head of organisations there. Spent a few years in Brisbane, 3 years, was asked to go back to New Zealand to run up and head up trade for Bunnings in New Zealand. Realised that we missed our friends and family back in Brisbane, and certainly the climate. And made the decision to come back a couple of years ago. In between that, travelled the world for 6 months, but now I think finally settled back here in Brisbane as sales director for Dulux and for Lincoln Sentry.
Now, it sounds, I know that you went from supermarkets into distribution into, sort of building materials, construction, and then kind of back into kind of retail distribution again, but in that sector. And it sounds very considered and deliberate. Was it actually that way? Or, as you were in your current role, were you looking at, the next logical thing? How have you made those career choices along the way?
Look, I'm probably a little bit different to others. I don't, people talk about 5 and 10 year career plans. A week's a long time in politics. It's even longer in the field that we're in. So for me, it's a little bit around how you actually feel about the business you're working with, the sort of cultural and organisational fit. I think that's really incredibly important about feeling the people you work with, particularly when the boss, the sort of remuneration, the terms and conditions are kind of a hygiene factor, but it goes beyond that. It's about, for me anyway, it's an emotional connection to the business. And I've been really fortunate to be involved with businesses that have had fantastic culture and, team that live that culture, live and breathe it. And for me, that matters more than other things. I've sort of always lived my life in sort of fairly much recently in terms of quadrants. It's going to be right personally, from a friendship, from a family, and from a work. And it's about balancing, I guess, the quadrants of those things.
Wow, that's really. I mean, that's not surprising, given the person that I know. The man that I'm looking at now and that I've come to know. I know how important certainly, Caroline is, but, your family, is as well in everything. And I know that, whatever decision you've made, there's always been, what do we want to do? What does Caroline and I want to do? What's right for us? And then making that decision, which is key. The reason I ask, Paul, is because I've had some feedback recently about the podcast that said, it's when I listen to the podcast, you have guests on there who demonstrate their experience, and then I know that they live the world, that I live. They've been on that journey, or I'm on the journey that they've been down, and they're kind of lighting the way. And that's why I ask that question, because I think sometimes people that are thinking about their roles in sales leadership in particular don't necessarily understand it as a real pathway into, commercial leadership roles, into director roles, into head of sales and commercial roles. And so that's kind of, the lens through which, I ask some of the questions. So I'm going to move now into a little bit more of a granular look into some of the stuff that you do and how you do what you do. When we caught up a few months back, you were talking to me about a different way of measuring sales team and sales leader impact. Can you tell us what the team was doing before you implemented this, and what it was that made you decide that there was a better way to measure that?
So I think I'd probably break it down into sort of 2 parts. First part is the sort of CRM packages that we use, and sales team, you can either be on the left or the right, whether you believe or don't believe as far as the effectiveness of CRM, and it's Big Brother or which it's an effective tool. For me, if I think about CRM, it's very much around a couple of areas. So one is really capturing sort of meaningful activities. And it's really there primarily as a help and a guide for the leader to help work with the individual or the territory manager on some of the activities that they're doing. Where is there a better way? If I think about it in sport analogy, 3 ways. You start off with training. So you do your pre-game routine, you analyze the numbers, what's your purpose in terms of what you're going to go out and talk to the customer about. Rather than just walk in there and do the hard sales technique, what is it that we're trying to uncover from the customer, and are we going to, achieve, helping them with a particular pain point? Then there's the sort of the game time, so the leaders with the territory manager, with the customer, and doing a lot around observed behaviour. And then the third part of, really, for me, the sport analogy is the post-game review, right? What worked well? What didn't work well? Did we win the game? Didn't we win the game? What could we learn for next week that we can do better in terms of the next visit? So having that and capturing those activities, is really important. I think, from a time management perspective, are we planning ahead? What's our route planning, right? All of those things, because ultimately the time of the individual for me is of paramount importance. It's the most important resource, and if we use it effectively, then we're going to get better outcomes. The second part of that is then giving information to the territory manager or the in-field salesperson around a view from a sales perspective of metrics.
Yep.
So data, and we captured several things here within Lincoln Sentry, from sort of top and bottom customers, declining customers, online sales, add-on mix, all of the things and the metrics that help us make more informed decisions, but also build up a picture for me around entitlement. Because too often, we sort of leave it to the territory manager. They might like the particular customer, but we're visiting them once a week or twice a week, and they're doing 9/10 of nothing. And is that really effective? And that's not really achieving the win-win for the business. So it's really building up a true picture of a customer, not just sales, which is always a thing, but margin, the primary profit, but also really important, the cost to serve. So whether they're on a rebate scheme, what's the freight agreement like? Do we give them showroom support in this particular industry? So lots of different things. What's their credit situation like? There's so many facets that go into understanding the true entitlement of a customer, because that then builds into actually what we then decide we want to do in terms of what we charge that customer and how profitable that customer is. So a lot around segmentation, but a lot around strong analytics to help us make more improved and better decisions.
I love that. I love what you've done because, for so many reasons. Whenever I hear about segmentation, what many salespeople and sales leaders will do is they'll segment just based on historical sales, which has no relevance necessarily. I mean, it might have some relevance, but very little relevance to what is possible. And just because someone spent something, last year doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spend the same this year. And if they're at max, then we have a different strategy. But if they've got more there that we can extract, then we have a different strategy again. Or if they're in decline, what's the strategy that we use there? And that's just on revenue. But you're actually looking at the whole of, how you said their entitlement. I love that word. But that's a great word, because that says, okay, if we're looking at a customer, what are they delivering back to the business, and what are we creating in that process? So you talked about revenue, but you talked about margin, and then you talked about cost to serve. Can I ask you a little bit more about the decision to calculate cost to serve, because that actually requires a bigger commitment by a business to be able to track that, doesn't it? Because you might have the desire as a sales leader to go, well, it makes sense to track cost to serve, because that tells me how effectively I'm setting up a contract, how effectively we're servicing that customer, and what are the other elements that are going into making sure that we're delivering, a reasonable amount for the customer as well as for us. But then measuring that sometimes businesses can push back. So tell me why you went down that path and how you got the rest of the business to support you in that measurement.
Well, we had some already strong measures which were sort of based, automated, which was ultimately what you want to do. You don't want to make it too, again, back to the labour intensity. But there were certain things we were able to draw just plugging in some data. A good example would be freight. So we have freight, customers on certain different freight rates. We're also easily able to measure what we call core sales, which generally tends to be at slightly lower margin versus more profitable add-on sales. We're able to track the percentage of core versus add-on, and you can clearly see, and this is one of the tactics for a salesperson, is if all you're getting is core and you're getting no add-on, then there needs to be a question if they want to retain a certain price or a certain, so therefore it's a trade-off. If you want to hold on to certain prices, and that's okay, but we need something in return. We were able to hold your price on this, but how about you give us something else over here? So we're able to have clear line of sight as to what is being bought by the customer from a core perspective and defining that, as opposed to what would be classified for us as an add-on. Another one as well, and we support customers or certain customers with what we call showrooms. So we help them with product.
Yeah.
That's okay, providing we're getting a sort of quid pro quo in terms of we will provide you this at X amount of discount or free of charge, but that needs to ladder up to us to get your business, rather than just take the free stock and then go off to a competitor, which has happened, and does happen. So
yes.
So I think, having sort of formal agreements around that, which is based on win-win principles, that's ultimately our aim.
Yeah. Yep. Amazing. Okay. I mean, one of the things that I'm banging on about this at the moment, because I think that it's absolutely one of the muscles that we need to be building, and that is the accountability muscle. And I take that term directly from another guest that I've had on the show called Trudy McDonald, who says that we need to really, start to rebuild our accountability muscle. Sales leaders, when you're a sales leader of sales leaders, that's even more true. And accountability conversations require that shared point of reference, which is why the data and that criteria is really important. And you're talking about dashboards, and that's what dashboards enable us to do. Was there any initial pushback or education that was required from you when you first introduced these dashboards?
Well, I think they were already in place, or a number of them were already in place. It was really about, are they active, or are they just sitting there in the background? And I think for us, it's about, what is the expectation at a sort of basic level of our leaders? I'll stay with our leaders is, we do measure what we call coaching conversations. So that sort of formal, when I say formal, it's we're not talking Einstein here. We're talking sitting down and working out game plan and just documenting that so we can use it as a referral for how we actually progressed against that. But the big thing around here was around change management. People saw it as admin. Okay. But even little things like doing tricks like around voice technology, you can add on C4C notes, or we call CRM notes, very effectively just by talking into a phone. AI's much better now. You can sort of use lots of technology or technological trips that mean it doesn't feel like Big Brother.
Yeah.
But certainly the feedback from the sales team on the whole was overwhelmingly positive, is that they got great insights into their customer behavior.
Wow.
Both good and both bad, and it allowed them then to formulate the game plan on the purpose of the call. And it's especially now, is, how do you manage costs more effectively? It's about the effectiveness of, in-field team are an expensive resource, very important resource, but you've got to weigh that up in terms of, what's the outcomes, as customers, particularly in sort of distribution businesses, where's the added value? I could go direct, or I could get it from a competitor. Price, it's how do they value the impact that our team can have, and quite blessed being with businesses that actually have a really high impact with customers.
So even though some of those dashboards are in place, it's about using those dashboards differently. And you talk about coaching conversations where you put together a game plan about how you're going to approach a customer, what you're going to cover in a territory, what the focus is. So I want to just come back for a moment. So they knew that those dashboards, some of those measures were in place and they were there. And even though you said some of it's helped them to have richer conversations or more informed conversations. They've got greater levels of insight into their customers, like I said, good and bad. But was there also an education piece that, okay, they might recognise all of that, but what do they do with it then? Did you have to help them to do that as part of your coaching conversations with them?
Totally. I think you've got lots of information, people that maybe not been exposed to this before, and how do you sort of work through that in terms of, very smart people that we've got within the organisation that can help sort of train and develop and, pick out the pieces that are important. I think sort of train the trainer. So basically train the leader. We would have to lead from the front as far as that's concerned. Yes. And also this is where the coaching comes in, actually observing the territory manager, how they're actually picking the data apart. Show me what you're going to be talking about, then observing them in field, then reviewing how they did post that. So a little bit of, lots of trial and error. Part of the best part of my job is getting out in a car, with team and, seeing and asking them the question. We would tell me, what's working, what isn't working, how do we adapt it, how do we refine it, how do we make it better? And we're constantly doing that. Technology doesn't stand still, as we all know. And I think certainly it's made a big impact on our business, is really having those level of insights.
See, this is the thing that I think makes all the difference between a leader that really understands what's going on and a leader that is just looking at a dashboard. And so you've got these amazing dashboards, but then you validate those against, what
totally.
you're also, And the I can't begin to say and how important this is. Not just, it's important for your leaders to be doing that with their teams. But what I'm hearing here is that someone as senior as you is also going out there and seeing what is going on in a customer conversation, how they're preparing, how they're conducting themselves, what the customer feedback is, so that you also have your finger on the pulse. When did you first start doing what I heard in another call being called four-legged sales calls, where you've got, the two people going along? When did you start doing that? And when did you realise the power of going with your salespeople into those conversations?
Oh, look, I've always worked on that principle and that philosophy. I know what it's like, being at the other end in terms of having treaded the boards myself for many years. But, I see a really critical part of certainly my role is removing organisational time stealers, because then there's always an excuse not to be out in field. The job of a territory manager is not sat behind a screen. Yes, right. A little bit. It's about in field, and that's the same for the leaders as well. If you're not spending a minimum of 70% of your time with your team and customers, something's wrong. You have too many meetings, so it's about strong meeting cadence, purposeful, less timely outcomes. So just removing the distractions and the noise and the excuses in many ways. It's just really about being very clear on the expectation of the role. Yes. So that's very much around role clarity.
Yes.
Both at the leader level and at the territory manager leader. And, as an executive leadership team is making sure that the dependencies are taken care of to allow the salesperson to do what they do best. But for me, it reinforces, and if I think back probably 9 to 12 months when I first took on this role, the conversations I had with the territory managers and with the customers reshaped the strategic plan in many ways for this business, reshaped it, because this is direct from, you can have customer surveys, you can do that, but the actual in the field, true feedback was consistent, and it meant us having to reshape and redefine our strategic plan.
Yes, because then it's live. It's all very good and well to have a strategy that everyone pats each other on the back for and looks great in a presentation. But then, things change in the market. Businesses are dynamic organisms, and even if a business stays the same, the conditions around that business might change significantly. And we all know that businesses don't stay the same. So, enabling there to be that level of adjustment based on what you're actually seeing, and you're seeing trends. Because if you're going out with your team over and over and over, it's not just one source of feedback, it's multiple. And then you can start to see patterns, you can start to see around corners, you can start to see the direction. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic.
Because Australia's a big place as well, and you've got not just segment nuances, you might have subcategory nuances, you might have state nuance. So it's about how do you sort of own your territory, own your fortress, and that might be different in different parts of the world and in different parts of Australia. So being on top of that and dominating your sort of domain is what it's about.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, we've talked about, some of the dashboards that you have, like the metrics that you have on your dashboard and how you use your dashboard as part of a broader conversation with leaders and the conversations that they then have with their own teams. If you were to go into another business, okay, and you were looking at that business to start with, what would you be, and you've got all of your sales leaders huddling around, what would that conversation look like in terms of, how you construct a dashboard that's meaningful in the first instance from scratch? So what are the specific measures that you would like to have in place in order to give you that initial sense of the picture of what's going on? Yeah, what would that include?
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, you need to look at, what's currently in play. Rather than reinvent Rome, the metrics, you go and talk to the sales team. Certainly, what I've done probably in every business is basically chuck myself, as I say, in a car and gone on the road, talk to team, customers, try and build a framework as to what's important, what really matters. Because sometimes you can have a plethora of measures, analysis paralysis, 20, 30, what really truly gets looked at. And I think if you can sort of capture maybe the 5, 6, 7 things max that really matter to an organization, we haven't got the time to look at that many metrics and measures. You can maybe look at, leave that to others in terms of what they can do. But from a salesperson's perspective, a lot of it for me is around the profitability of that customer. What is the true profitability of that customer? And then, as I say, blending in all the things that contributes to the profitability of that customer. The old adage, sales vanity, profit sanity. It's one that certainly holds true. We go chasing the dollar, the top line looks great, but actually it's carving up distribution in not a good way, or it's doing, from a branch perspective, they're too hard. From a customer services, the credits are going through the roof. They're just too hard a customer to deal with. They're not dealing with us online. Therefore, the territory manager has to do all the online ordering for them. That's a cost. So it's really about understanding the true profitability of customer, but also understanding the markets and the segments we want to play in. I think that's really important as well, is defining, which customer we're selling to. Are they a good customer, a good segment? Yes, no.
Yeah.
And then deciding if that's the path we want to go. And I've been with businesses that have sort of cut off certain segments because they've realized holistically that this is not a segment that's attractive, or it's just too hard.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because it's more about, it's about making informed decisions that ultimately roll back to the profitability for the business you're working with.
Yeah, that's right. I think teaching your leaders to really look at, and then them teaching their salespeople to look at the profitability of each customer starts to put another lens over the way that they're engaging as well, because it when you then kind of walk it back and you go, okay, so is this customer trading profitably or unprofitably or on the edge of that because of us and the way that we've set it up? you know, in terms of their expectations of us? Are we just saying yes? Are we having a true negotiation that's good for us as well as good for them? Do we know how to have that? It informs a lot of the other leading behaviours that contribute to that, doesn't it?
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's always going to be the thing. I mean, I think, ultimately we work for a business. Yes, it's, the customer's obviously very important, but I see so many, so much evidence of situations whereby we simply shouldn't be dealing with that customer.
Right.
Right. And we've got a great relationship, and we use the word relationship a lot, and that's all well and good.
Yes.
But actually, that doesn't really help our business, and even for those smaller or medium-sized customers, if you're demonstrating fantastic loyalty,
yes,
and you're getting maybe the full basket of goods, then we're much more willing to work with that particular customer, maybe if they're in times of trouble or whatever, because they've shown loyalty. We won't just get picked off by competitors the minute somebody comes along with a cheaper price. We're in it for the long haul. So that is, for me, true partnership. Yeah,
that is the sign of a true partnership. So, okay, so let's just say you've inherited a group of sales leaders and they're not tracking cost to serve. Say they at the best, they're just maybe looking at margin. All right. How do you get them away from that belief that a lot of sales leaders, salespeople have, that sales fixes everything? If we just generate more revenue, everything else will be fine, which sounds great in theory, but how do you kind of help somebody to make the transition from thinking about revenue generation only to engaging in a commercial way? And what are some of the skill sets that sort of underpin the ability to do that?
Well, this is why I think you need really strong business partners. You're talking about whether it be sort of, finance, for example, is creating an agreed set of core metrics or gathering information from a metrics perspective that helps inform. I don't want sales leaders to be going away trying to pull information here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
Certainly working in larger organisations, the skill set's generally there to pull information, an agreed set of reports, etc. That is what we're trying to achieve, and that's therefore put in such a way that helps inform and educate the sales leader. Because I've seen it so often, as I say, with leaders that spend hours upon hours creating their own Excel spreadsheets. Everybody's got a different source of truth, which is not great.
No.
And we don't want to take away entrepreneurship or flexibility totally. But I think, just sticking to simplicity and simple measures. Yep. Certainly that's been a sort of mantra for me throughout, is around simplicity. We can get ourselves too wrapped up in complexity, and any fool can do that. It's more around, keeping it simple, those key core measures that works in with what the company's business objective is and its plan.
Yes.
And strong KPIs to hold ourselves accountable to.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And you're right. It's if there isn't a simple way for leaders to be able to track and capture the right data, because the business is supporting it to do that, they will go off and create all sorts of lovely looking spreadsheets, because all in the right spirit, like they're doing it to genuinely be helpful and to start to get clarity for themselves about, what's really happening. But I like your principle of simplicity.
Because I said, who can come up with the best bar chart or the best pie chart?
Right,
and
exactly.
There's a competition for that. And that's,
absolutely. Paul, I have really enjoyed our conversation today, and I think that when it comes to the importance of looking at that whole profitability piece, it's such an important conversation. Before we wrap up, though, I just want to ask you another question just about that profitability piece. So when we're looking at, a per customer profitability, do you also, is there a way of tracking as part of your dashboard the profitability of a portfolio or per portfolio? So, for example, if I'm an account manager and I have 20 customers in my portfolio or territory, is there a way of tracking, the profitability of the entire portfolio or the percentage of that portfolio that's profitable or not? Or is that part of it or not?
Well, great question. And it's actually very topical because we just changed all the incentives recently around, with a more focus on what we call a primary profit. It doesn't go necessarily the whole 9 yards in terms of that potentially that cost to serve people, but that goes into behaviours. Right. Around from a territory manager perspective. So team now are measured on primary profit only, as far as plus a set of behaviours, not top line sales.
Right.
So looking at that and then working through, we agreed a sort of delegation authority around what entitlements customers are required for, say, freight. Yep. Or rebates or those other things. So there's a process behind that as well, and that some of that goes into primary profit. But that's been a big change for us. In not just seen, as I say, we've patted ourselves in the back, we've done a great sales line, but actually the margin's gone down by 3% or 4%. Yep. And what it also does is it encourages the field teams and the leaders to go after more profitable segments and categories. A real focus, if you want to push, say, NPD, they know where they can get better primary profit dollars through pushing those particular and having focus on some of those particular categories as well, rather than just focusing and selling. We can sell the bread and milk all day, every day. It goes beyond how do you sell and go looking for new business.
Yep, which is really important, and it says then because what I love about that is the behaviours that are required in order to get those outcomes. Because what it says to me is I can no longer go out to market focused only on product and price. I need to be better than that, and I need to be engaging as a business partner in my customers' world so that they understand how I can help them to grow their business. And in doing so, we're having different conversations that also enables me to understand, which customers I want to align myself with and which customers to let go. And sometimes that means, like you said, going into different segments as well. If I've got gaps in my portfolio of areas that I need to, to really make sure that they're profitable, then that's where that fosters that behaviour.
Yeah, because I think as well, you think about it from an online perspective, we're a pretty greedy business here and been with businesses similar, and it's, we'll walk in and even to the point that here's the customer's list and they're giving you the order, and there's nothing wrong with giving an order. Yep. We love orders being given to us, but it's how do we then help transition and make it more palatable for the customers to say potentially go online allows our territory managers to go and do more things with them.
That's right.
So it's, as I say, sometimes people forget, like, taking an order is not a bad word. It's just the method and sometimes in which we do it.
Right. Yeah, it's very seductive, isn't it, when we're given an order by a customer, because it's just like, oh, yeah, fantastic, bring it on. Yeah. But we don't necessarily then, build on that or use that as just that, that key, to the door. Yeah. Not to use that kind of that lock and key analogy with Lincoln Sentry, but no. But listen, thank you so much for our conversation today, Paul, and hopefully next time I'm in Brisbane, you're not in Melbourne, and there's no cyclone.
You got it. Thanks very much, Ingrid. Pleasure to be on.
Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how The Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, please email me at ingrid@thesalesdoctor.com.au. Visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. dulux.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.